Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a quick look at the WebArcade Editor. The WebArcade Editor is a graphical user interface that allows for creating feeds without knowledge of the underlying document format. It tries to make creating feeds as simple as possible by providing features such as drag and drop and quick test capabilities. Before jumping into the editor, it's worth noting that everything that's covered in this demo is detailed in the documentation. Let's take a brief look at the editor documentation. You can locate the editor documentation by clicking on the Editor tab within the top navigation bar. The editor documentation includes information that details the various tables and dialogues found throughout the feed workspace, the actions that are located in the side navigation bar, and various features supported by the editor, such as drag and drop capabilities. At this point, let's go ahead and jump into the editor by clicking the Build button located on the main WebArcade site. You can also get to the editor directly by navigating to editor.webarcade.com. The main workspace area contains various components that allow for viewing and editing the active feed. The active feed persists between browser sessions, so for example, hitting the refresh button does not cause any changes to be lost. The feed properties section near the top contains high-level information about the active feed. Let's take a look at the feed properties by opening the feed dialog. On the general page, we can see the title of the feed along with an optional long title and description. There are also tabs for specifying the feed's optional thumbnail and background images. We'll focus on those more later in the demo. The main portion of the workspace consists of two separate tabs. The Categories tab, which contains the categories within the feed, and the Items tab, which contains the items or games within a specific category. Within the Items tab, we can use the Categories pull-down to switch between viewing the items within the different categories. Now let's go ahead and switch back to the Categories tab and edit an existing category to view its properties. Much like the Feed Properties dialog, the Category dialog allows you to edit the title along with an optional long title and description. There are also tabs for setting the optional thumbnail and background images. All of the tables within the editor allow you to set page sizes which are persistent between sessions. Let's take a quick look at the actions that are available for the Categories table. The up and down arrows can be used to reorder the categories. The duplicate action can be used to create a deep copy of the selected category. That means that all the items within the category are replicated. The delete action will remove the category and all its associated items from the feed. You can find the Analyze option under the More menu, but we'll focus on that later when we develop our own feed. Clicking on the item count in a categories row will switch to the Items tab and display the items for that particular category. Let's go ahead and use the category pull down to switch to the Game Boy Advance category. And then let's go ahead and edit one of the Game Boy Advance items. The Items General tab looks very similar to both the category and feed property editors. The main difference being that there's an application pull down that specifies the application or emulator that is associated with the item. The Properties tab consists of fields that are specific to that particular application type. One field that's present on most application types is the ROM URL. Like the editors we saw earlier, the Items editor contains tabs for specifying images for both the thumbnail and background images. Alright, let's go ahead and take a look at a homebrew game for the Nintendo Game Boy and see how its properties are different. As you can see, the properties are quite different from the ones for the Game Boy Advance. In this particular case, we have options for setting the screen colors, different palettes, and whether we want to show borders. The play button located in each item's row allows you to launch it and play the game. Alright, let's go ahead and exit out. Alright, at this point, let's go ahead and take a look at the actions located in the menu bar on the left. The new action provides several options for creating a new feed. You can clone the example feed, which is a fairly simple feed containing 6 items across 2 categories. You can clone WebArcade's default feed, and you can create an empty feed. Let's go ahead and quickly clone the example feed, and then let's go ahead and clone the default feed. The import action allows you to import and edit an existing feed. You can import a feed from a URL or from a local file. Let's go ahead and import the example feed using its public URL. It's important to note that the import action simply copies the contents of the selected feed into the editor. You're not actually editing that file or the remote feed. You're simply editing your local copy. The export action exports the current feed to its JSON document format and downloads it. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at the current feed's internal document structure within TextEdit. Later on in this demo, we'll take the contents of an exported feed and host it in the cloud so that others can load it. The test button allows us to view the feed that we're currently editing within the WebArcade player. Any changes we make will be immediately reflected when we click the test button. In this particular case, we're simply switching the order of the categories. The load button allows us to load feeds that have been saved locally. The table is empty because we haven't saved any feeds locally. Let's go ahead and save the local feed now. Saved feeds are uniquely identified by the feed's title, so let's go ahead and change the name of the feed and then save it. If a feed already exists with that title, you'll be prompted and asked if you want to override it. At this point, let's go ahead and clone the default feed, which will replace our existing feed. Then we'll use the load dialog to load it back. As you can see, our feed was successfully loaded back into the editor. At this point, let's go ahead and create a brand new feed. We'll start by using the new action to create an empty feed. And then let's go ahead and give our new feed a title and description. We'll go ahead and skip the images for now, but we'll come back to them later. Let's also go ahead and edit our one and only category, providing it a title and description. Like before, we'll skip the images until later. Alright, at this point, let's go ahead and start adding some items to our category. We could use the Add button in the toolbar to add items manually, but that's quite a bit of work, and we'll come back to that later. Instead, let's use some of the other options that are available to add items quickly. The Add from Dropbox action allows us to select one or more ROM files from our Dropbox account and have a corresponding set of items created in the current category. So let's go ahead and pick some homebrew titles from the Dropbox account across the various platforms that are supported by WebArcade. Once selection has been completed, the WebArcade editor attempts to perform an analysis on each of the selected ROMs. It attempts to determine the application or emulator for the item, the properties to associate with the particular item, a title and long title for the item, and whether a thumbnail and background image is available. In this particular case, you can see the editor was able to determine the title, images, and the appropriate application type for each of the selected ROMs. If we examine one of the created items, we can see that the editor was able to determine the title, a description, the appropriate application type, set the properties for the item, and establish a thumbnail and background image. Let's go ahead and quickly test out Anguna to make sure it's working correctly. Alright, let's go ahead and exit back out. In addition to Dropbox support, the editor also allows you to drag and drop ROM-based URLs directly onto the workspace. Let's go ahead and drag and drop some games from the Open Homebrew section of the Internet Archive. As you can see, as soon as the URL is dropped, the editor analyzes it to determine its application type, appropriate meta information, and applicable images. By default, the items table sorts the items by their titles alphabetically. We can switch the sort to be by the time it was added to ensure the items we are adding always appear at the front of the table. Let's go ahead and add some more games from the Internet Archive. The editor also provides the ability to queue up multiple URLs at once and have them analyzed simultaneously. This eliminates the need to wait for the analysis to occur between each item that is being added. To do this, we need to select the Create from URLs action, which is located under the More menu. While you can copy and paste or type in URLs manually, this dialog also supports the ability to drag and drop URLs. Let's go ahead and drag some from the Internet Archive. As you can see, they're all being analyzed at once. Once this operation completes, they'll appear at the top of the items table. At this point, let's go ahead and use the test action to see what our feed currently looks like in the WebArcade player. As you can see, all the items we added have the appropriate meta information and images. You can also run the analyze operation on existing items. This will determine the appropriate application type, meta information, and images, and apply them to the selected items. Let's go ahead and modify the information and images related to the Bentley Bear Atari 7800 homebrew game. Then, let's go ahead and run the analyze operation, and we'll see that the latest information about the game has been reapplied, including the meta information and images. The analyze operation can also be run at the category level. This will analyze all the items for the selected categories. There are times when the editor will be unable to determine the application type for a ROM. For example, Atari 2600 ROMs have a generic extension of .bin without any characteristics in their binaries that make them easily identifiable. In situations like these, you really have no other option than to create an item manually. Let's go to Atari Age and attempt to drag the latest version of a homebrew game that is currently being developed, titled Game of the Bear. As you can see, the editor was unsuccessful in determining the application type. At this point, we'll go ahead and add the item manually. Let's start by selecting and dragging in the title. Next, let's drag in a description. And then let's switch to the Properties tab and drag in the ROM URL. At this point, we can go ahead and save our changes and test it out by hitting the play button. As you can see, the game is playing fine. Not quite as easy as dragging and dropping a ROM URL and having the editor auto-detect it, but not too difficult either. At this point, let's go ahead and switch back to the Categories tab and add images to our only category. Let's start by editing the category and clicking on the Thumbnail tab. Let's go and pick an image from Unsplash.com to use as the thumbnail. Once we find an image we like, we can drag and drop it on the current thumbnail image in the editor. This essentially copies URL from Unsplash.com into the thumbnail location field. The yellow border around the thumbnail location indicates that the image does not satisfy the required dimensions for WebArcade thumbnails, which is 400 by 300. When this occurs, WebArcade attempts to use an external proxy to dynamically resize the thumbnail on the fly. While this may work in certain circumstances, it is not recommended. We'll discuss this a bit more later in the demo. Let's go ahead and use the same image for our background. Okay, now let's go ahead and address the thumbnail sizing. The editor provides links to a couple of web-based tools that can be used to resize the image. For example, one of the tools allows you to copy and paste the image into its editor and export it at the desired dimensions, which are automatically set to 400 by 300. However, as you can see in our particular case, the image has already been resized by the external proxy to be 400 by 300, so we can simply right-click and save the resized image locally. Realistically, we really want to don't want to have our images and upload them to a dedicated image hosting service. Images could get removed, URLs could change, etc. Let's go ahead and save the background image locally as well. Now let's go ahead and go to Imgur.com and upload our thumbnail and background images. Now that our images are hosted in Imgur, we can drag them back to the editor and we will see that the image URLs are updated to point at Imgur. As you can see, the yellow border indicating a non-compliant thumbnail goes away. This is due to the fact that the image URL now points to an image that is 400 by 300. Alright, let's go ahead and do these same steps again for the feed images. Let's go ahead and save them locally again and then upload them to Imgur. And then let's go ahead and drag them back from Imgur. At this point, our feed is ready to go. We have added ROMs from both Dropbox and the Internet Archive, and we have added images to our category and feed objects. At this point, let's go ahead and save the feed locally to ensure we don't accidentally replace it. Then let's go ahead and click the test button to see what our feed looks like in the WebArcade player. We can see our category images are showing up, as well as our feed images. We now have a feed saved locally, but what we really want to be able to do is share it with our other devices or other people. To do that, let's go ahead and export the feed. Then let's go ahead and open the feed in TextEdit and copy its contents. Let's go ahead and post the feed using Pastebin. It's recommended that you use a registered account with Pastebin, since that allows for editing and updating the feed in the future. In some circumstances, Pastebin will incorrectly flag content based on their overly aggressive filters. If that occurs, you can use one of the many Pastebin competitors. Just ensure that the service you use has an option to provide the raw content, not one that displays the content with HTML surrounding it. Alright, let's go ahead and view the raw form of our feed within Pastebin. We now have a URL to our feed in raw form, but unfortunately the URL is going to be hard to remember. So let's go ahead and use the TinyCC URL shortening service and associate a human readable name. At this point, we can go ahead and copy the human readable URL for our feed. Let's go ahead and add our new feed to the WebArcade player. Let's go ahead and use the Add button to register our newly created feed. As you can see, our feed was successfully loaded from the cloud. Let's go ahead and try to load this feed on our Xbox Series X. Alright, here we are on our Xbox Series X. Let's go ahead and load the feed we just created. Let's go ahead and enter the TinyCC URL we created earlier. As you can see, the feed we created has loaded successfully. Let's go ahead and play a quick game of Ixion. I think that's how you pronounce it. This is a really interesting shmup where your ship can't shoot. To survive, you must navigate around all the bullets. I typically only last a few seconds. Yep, pretty much as expected. Thanks a lot for sticking through this video. Please visit webarcade.com, play some games, create and share some feeds, or visit the WebArcade Discord server to participate in discussions about future features. Thanks again.